Good afternoon. Bon après-midi. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et
distinguished guests. It's our pleasure to receive you today for this day that is the 25th anniversary of Indigenous people in Canada.
Here at the museum, and I'd like to start our afternoon's event by acknowledging that we are gathered on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. I'm pleased to welcome you to the panel presentation entitled A Closer Look at Museum Training for Indigenous Peoples in Canada. A special welcome to those of you who are participating via webcast. If viewers on the web have any questions for our panelists, please do send them in, and we'll ensure that they are addressed during the Q&A session following our discussion. Leading that discussion to my right is Jameson Brant. Wave to the web, Jameson. Jameson is a Turtle Clan member with lineage from 6 Nations and Tyendinaga. She has many decades of experience in the culture and heritage field and is herself a graduate of the Aboriginal Training Program in Museum Practices, as are several other members of our staff. And Jameson has been the curator of that program for the past 12 years of its repeated success. Please welcome now Jameson Brant to introduce our panelists. Et bonne chance dans le discours à suivi. Jameson, please.
Sego suwa kwego, kawisa hawe ni iyungyats. It is my pleasure to welcome you here today to be part of a special day, which is the 25th anniversary of the Aboriginal Training Program in Museum Practices. It's also a day where we celebrate the graduation of 3 of our Indigenous interns. Since the program's been running in 1993, as a result and recommendation from the Task Force on Museums and First Peoples, training was strongly recommended in that document. The program has worked with some 120 Indigenous peoples to train them in the museum profession. Probably 85 of that number of people has successfully completed the program. And today with us here, we have 3 of the graduates who we've asked to come back to provide a bit of their perspective on some of their experiences with the program, where it led them to be as a cultural ambassador, and the kind of work they're doing now. As you hear from the interns one by one, I think you'll start to gain a sense of how valuable the program is in shaping the way that Indigenous culture is being preserved and presented across the country and now internationally. So we have with us here today Karyne Belanger Holmes, who graduated from the program. She'll be our first guest to present her experiences. So let's hear from Karyne.
Hello, bonjour. My name is Karyne Holmes. I am Métis and Anishinaabe with ties to Batchewana First Nation and the historic Métis communities of Sault Ste. Marie and Penetanguishene. I graduated the Aboriginal Training Program in Museum Practices in 2015, and I'm here today because not only did I thoroughly enjoy my time in this program from beginning to end, but I really want to advocate how the experience and mentorship I received while I was here directly led me towards a career journey that I wanted. So I want to share a bit about what I personally found significant about the program and the work it has helped me accomplish since. So it's now been 3 years since I finished the ATPMP, and I'm happy to share that I have been recently appointed to an archivist and researcher role with the Library and Archives Canada to help implement their Indigenous documentary heritage initiatives over the span of the next 3 years. I am specifically working on the digitization portion of the project, so I am currently on a team that is working towards finding and digitizing archival records of Indigenous content held within the National Collection and making them available through the Library and Archives website. So this will minimize the physical barriers to researching at the National Archives, and another major component of the project will be to improve the database descriptions and metadata for the records that are digitized, so that as many relevant records as possible will appear in your search results. The goal is to overall improve and facilitate the research experience experience for Indigenous individuals and communities. And this work is about making archival material as available and accessible as possible. And so I feel that I am in a position where I have important responsibilities and doing meaningful work, because in all of the cultural research and historical related work I have ever done, access to information and finding documentation has been a constant, persistent challenge. At the time that I applied to the ATPMP, I was working at the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto with a community-based history research group called First Story. And at this time, I was interested in curatorial research and sharing history through gallery and museum exhibitions, as well as with digital platforms. And this being a primary interest of mine, I applied to the internship program for experience and training that would allow me to continue this type of work and at a higher level. But there is another important reason that I was keen to try the ATPMP, and that is that while I was working out of the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, this is a friendship centre that focuses on and is known for delivering social services, but there is a little known about but substantial collection of historical resources housed here, both artifacts and a range of textual records and media. There are valuable materials here, and I imagine this is the case for several community centres across Canada, that there are valuable materials that are essentially inaccessible and at risk of damage or loss just because they are stored haphazardly with no record of materials within them, and this is just due to the fact of how and when they were accumulated. So the situation here is approximately 100 boxes containing textual records, photographs, and audiovisual recordings that all found their way to the center through a variety of avenues, most with no accompanying record of what kind of content these resources held. And during the time I was there was nobody in our team that had the knowledge or training required to process and care for this quantity and range of material. And we are also restricted by the little to none financial resources to carry out this work. So we wanted these to be publicly accessible materials, and we wanted to keep them within the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto. But in terms of the work that was required to carry this vision through, I was personally completely clueless on how to proceed, and this was very, very discouraging. And so this is one of the reasons I decided to apply for the training program. And in my internship placements, I was able to request and receive 2 different training experiences associated with the situation. I received experience in archival processing and description work for accessions, and I spent time with the development team to learn fundraising strategies and how to find and correspond with potential supporters of your project. So this is an example of how I had some specific objectives coming into the program and how this program catered to my specific personal learning goals. For those who are not familiar with the current structure of this internship, the first 3 weeks when interns arrive are very busy. They are packed full of orientation workshops and presentations. You meet professionals of all fields across the museum and get an insight into their types of projects and examples of how their work fits into and is essential into the overall functioning of the museum. So when you enter the program, you may think you already know what you want to learn, but these first few weeks opens your eyes to the various roles required and within cultural institutions that you had no idea were needed or existed. And for me, it was this previously unknown and unexpected role that ended up being my most memorable training placement. The program met my expectations in addressing my initial goals of learning about curatorial research and collections-based research, in fundraising and archival processing, but Jameson also was able to coordinate a special placement for me that I had not expected, and this was as a collections information liaison, which is a position that combines research work and community engagement through being a contact person who responds to requests from the public for information about specific objects in the collections and requests to visit these items. While I was in this placement, I was able to take part in organizing and being a liaison for a 2-day visit from a group of urban Indigenous seniors living in Toronto that I had met while I was living there. And this is a group of residential school survivors who had formed together to engage with material culture objects as an opportunity to incite cultural revitalization, reclamation, a sense of community, and cultural pride. And they have been visiting heritage institutions containing Indigenous collections. And within these visits, they share memories, experiences, and knowledge that are evoked by the artifacts. And when the group expressed interest in visiting the Museum of History, I wanted to be part of the coordination of the visit. And Jameson set up my placement to learn exactly how to coordinate special visit requests. We developed a 2-day itinerary that included tours of galleries and conservation labs and talks with curators of the museum's Indigenous collections. And it concluded with a private viewing of types of artifacts specifically requested by the group members, mainly items belonging to their home communities. In addition to the logistics planning, that was my responsibility to navigate the collections database to find and request to pull the objects that the group was interested in. And because a large amount of colleagues across the museum participated and allocated their time to this visit and shared our enthusiasm for this visit, for me, this placement went beyond learning the role of a collections liaison. This experience was a highlight of my internship, and it was an overall encouraging experience because it served as a model for how memory institutions can meaningfully engage with and develop or strengthen relationships with Indigenous communities and contribute to processes for reconciliation. It was a motivational experience to continue working in memory institutions, to have the opportunity to initiate more interactions like this. Between my graduation from the program and my current work with Library and Archives Canada, I had accepted a position with the Métis Nation of Ontario as a historical researcher for their registry division. And right away in this position, I noticed how I was transferring what I had learned in my research training to this new work. From using advanced search methods and databases to find records, up to building narratives based on the analysis and consolidating of records. These are some of the skills in curatorial research that I applied to my position at the Métis Nation of Ontario. And while I was there, I was part of a team that undertook an intensive genealogical research project with a deliverable of nearly 100 reports and graphic representations of Ontario's historic Métis families and communities, which have been published on the MNO website. And the documentation of these families and their members served the purpose of showing how families who identified as Métis have been long established and connected to certain territories, which allows their contemporary descendants to access their harvesting rights. And this was an important research project that affected a lot of people. And a second highlight of my time with the MNO were my travels to 4 communities in northwestern Ontario to conduct one-on-one workshops with individuals interested in their genealogy and family history and share with them the resources and research methods that I had learned. So these are really fantastic and rewarding experiences, which I owe gratitude to the ATPMP that first to have received experience that had gotten my resume noticed for this research position, and second to have prepared me to enter this role with confidence. So in conclusion, I believe that this training program in museum practices teaches both skills and experiences that shape how interns will want to move forward in their career and their work. For myself, I want to continue with work associated with historical documentation and application of historical documentation to reconnect individuals with their personal and community histories. I find archives to be fascinating and exciting and full of surprises. I have been with the Indigenous Documentary Heritage Initiatives for just under 3 months, and over the next 3 years, I have some hopes and goals for how I will contribute to make these initiatives successful. I am fortunate to be working with a fellow researcher who contributes an Inuit perspective and also with a National Indigenous Advisory Committee. And so this is an opportunity to incorporate Indigenous perspectives in descriptions of records to make sure descriptions are accurate and comprehensive and provide sufficient context. It is important to me that the National Archives will engage in meaningful consultations and dialogue with communities that their archival collections are associated with. And I will be a voice to advocate for respectful care of any sensitive materials we come across. And I should note that the process for care of collections is another insight that I bring forward from my experience with the museum. I am looking forward to the upcoming years where I will be able to gain specialized knowledge about Indigenous-related records held in a national collection and hopefully become a point of contact and a point of guidance for the contents held here that can support the various needs and the various interests of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karyne. I think you're beginning to get a sense of how valuable the program is and the kind of difference it can make in one person's life and a number of communities' lives. And I think everybody knows now that we're living in some pretty rapidly changing and dynamic times in terms of cultural preservation for Indigenous people and respect for Indigenous culture worldwide. So we're going to move on now to our next story. And this is a presentation from Curtis Lazore, who is from Akwesasne Nation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kaliwagelo Yugyats. Wagata Huni ne Akwesaslono. My Mohawk name is Kaliwagelo, and that means he lays the words down. Wagata Huni is my clan. I'm a member of the Wolf clan, and I'm a member of the Akwesasne Mohawk community. For those of you that don't know, our community is located right on the international border, as well as the border of New York State, Quebec, and Ontario. So we live in quite a jurisdictional nightmare. My interest and my influences early on in my life derived from the Akwesasne Museum, which is located on the southern portion of our community, with classes that were held in the community to learn how to make musical instruments. And my past teachers were Gessel Thomas as well as John Thomas, who recently passed away, and great brothers of the sons of clan mother Georgia Thomas and past chief Standing Arrow. So it was those type of classes that really engaged me into making the tools that our grandfathers and our grandmothers made for our people to coexist with the natural world. And then also student employment with the Native North American Traveling College, who has a long history of cultural education, to get the word out there to other First Nations communities that we are a proud people. We have a lot to be thankful for, and we have a direction, and we should be happy and proud of that and continue in that direction. So it was these elements that exposed me to museum practices. And the Aboriginal Training Program here really opened my eyes to a national level as well as international. Past positions, I held a museum coordinator position. I worked at all stages of the museum facilities. I worked at the small community museum where we have 2 or 3 rooms of items on display, where I acted as a collections manager, conservationist, tour guide, paper pusher, as well as the Canadian Canoe Museum in Peterborough when I was a student at Trent University and Sir Sanford Fleming College. Kind of a medium-sized facility with specialized fields. And then also I worked here as a summer student and intern with the program. So there's the National Museum where it has its own departments that are large and really overwhelming to somebody like myself who comes from a small farming community in Akwesasne. So I was quite fortunate to have that experience at all levels. My experience here with the Aboriginal Training Program and museum practices brought me to a lot of different areas. Currently, I am an environmental assessment officer with the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, but I'm still involved with cultural resource management. I get calls monthly, sometimes weekly, by archaeologists who are looking for some advice and some direction. I'm involved with the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee Standing Committee on Burial Rules and Regulations, and repatriation matters and Section 106 consultations with the federal and state governments in the South. Also, we deal with a lot of auction houses abroad with a lot of artifacts that are going up for sale from private collections. really exposed me and educated myself with this drive that I have of learning about the cultural resource management of our heritage items. The sacredness of rattles, different masks, medicine bundles, how important that is to get that back to our people, and what's the capsule that process is going to take, or what image is that going to take to arrive back in our people's hands. A lot of different avenues at a lot of different levels. So never-ending meetings and consultations. I've been exposed to highway projects, working with the Haudenosaunee. Federal highway projects go through village sites. They want to consult. Canada as well, with Parks Canada. A lot of our national parks are in areas where our people had hunted and gathered and lived for thousands of years. Trying to tie that all into the teaching I had here, the learning, the handling those artifacts, exposing myself to them, and then creating some inspiration to perhaps create something like that myself. When I left the program here, I enrolled in a program. It was a black ash basketry apprenticeship program with one of our master basket makers in Akwesasne. For those of you that do not know, Akwesasne has a real big industry in the black ash basket making world and native baskets. Our basket makers have collections around the world within the Vatican, with the Queen, Prime Minister, the President, governors, collections around the world. Some of our fancy baskets are well known, but I learned how to make the utility baskets, so pack baskets, your everyday potato basket, corn washing basket, a lot of utilitarian baskets. And it was a wonderful journey that I was exposed, or that spark started here, what was then the Canadian Museum of Civilization. Going into the collections, looking at baskets that my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my grandfather had made or had some influence in. For me to go through that type of learning, self-learning and education, and then in the real world today as an environmentalist, understanding that there may not be any ash trees left for my grandchildren because of invasive species. The emerald ash borer beetle, decimating stands of ash trees. So now in Akwesasne, we're looking at alternative baskets. We're starting to learn from the Potawatomi, from the Ojibwe, birch bark baskets, hickory bark baskets, elm baskets, elm bark. What are some of the baskets that our people did make but aren't as utilized today? What type of materials? Using the spruce roots and the pitch and to seal the baskets up. So it's an ongoing learning, and I really enjoy it. As an environmentalist, I'm pulled in other directions, but I still keep current with cultural resource management as I sit on a lot of board of directors, committees, commissions, to try to revitalize our culture, our language, the continuation of our people to continue washing the white corn with hardwood ashes, the traditional way, grinding the corn, creating those items that are used in those methods. And also endorsing and encouraging our young artists to continue practicing weaving with the traditional materials from the Mother Earth, continuing fishing techniques that your grandfather and grandparents taught you, giving thanks for what we have, but not asking for anything else, because everything we need is here for our use. Thank you.
It's funny, when I woke up this morning and I was thinking about how the day was going to go, and I thought about Curtis, where we first met was at a museum meeting in the 59ers Club in Tynanega.
Yes.
So we've come a long way since then. I think what Curtis is getting at is really important to note, because we hear all these people think of Indigenous people, and we had some comments this morning that were really on the mark about this, that they're all the same, and that we all sort of get lumped into this one basket where we all sort of are these Native people. And I've always heard these stories about 7 generations and Indigenous people protecting the earth and being in a position where they're going to look for 7 generations ahead. And in our Haudenosaunee teachings, what I've been told, passed down through oral tradition, is that for us, those 7 generations mean that in your lifetime, you're in the middle, and you may have the opportunity to know your great-grandparents, and they may pass things along that they learned from their ancestors to your grandparents, who in turn pass it down to you. And it's our responsibility in the middle of that to listen to those teachings, because we're going to be responsible for passing those down to our children, to their children, and to their grandchildren. And if these are valuable messages, we better start listening and paying attention to what we're going to convey and communicate. And this, to the Haudenosaunee people anyway, is the way that we view the value of 7 generations. So I think it's really hits the mark with some of the things you're talking about, Curtis. So the next person that we're going to introduce is Janice George. And Dean mentioned that I was an intern in the program years ago. I don't want to say how many years ago. Janice was one of my colleagues in the program, and she just came to the program with so many skills and so much knowledge, and then went on to do some really, really interesting things. So let's hear it from Janice George.
Thank you, Jameson. Tanoyap and Sequatos, Ayas Chaptanoyap, Chepximiya, Siyam, Kwashamatsna, Tanachan Plas Nak, Skochopmish Uchumeoch. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be here on Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. Peace to every one of you this morning, or this afternoon now. I'm still on BC time. So I'm really honored to be here and talk about my experience in the program. It was, I can't remember the date.
2005.
Had to have Jameson say it. 2005. So before I was in the internship program, I was involved at home with the culture and history in our nation. My first job with our nation was at 18, and I was interviewing and taping elders' history. So that was my first job, and it seems to be that's how I was perceived or labeled in my nation. I just kept on getting hired to interview elders, and then it was filming elders. But what an amazing experience, and how fortunate, to be doing that kind of work. And so when I applied to come to the program, Vancouver had just put in the bid for the 2010 Olympics. And we were working on one of the legacy projects from the Olympics that the Squamish Nation would receive as one of the 4 host nations. We built a cultural center, 34,000 square feet, beautiful longhouse style, in the shape of a longhouse, and cultural center. And so we were on the design team for that. It was a opportunity of a lifetime to be able to sit with the architects and design the building, and then, then see them start to build it, and bless the land, see them start to build it, and then was fortunate enough in that time in 2003, went to learn how to Salish weave. And there was one weaver in our community at that time. And we went to learn. I went to art school for 4 years before that, but anyway. So we went to learn and went home and started teaching. And because the one person that was weaving wasn't really that comfortable teaching. So it was a team, my husband and I, Willard Joseph, and we started teaching at home. So we went from one weaver to 2 years ago, we sort of did a rough estimate and asked our weavers how many they've taught. And about 2 years ago, it was over 2,500 people that have tried it, and many weavers came out of that. So when we came here, I was so excited to come here, and I met Dr. Leslie Tepper, who is a weaver and comes from a weaving family as well. And we were able to secure some funding and bring weavers here. We talked about, we brought a youth and weavers from different Coast Salish communities that we had taught at, and that were actually had some weavers there. There wasn't very many. So while we were here, we were able to look at the collections of Salish weaving, Salish wool weaving, and we sat down and had a meeting about Salish wool weaving, which was just amazing. It created a lot of excitement in the community that we're bringing these weavers here to look at the collection here, and from the smaller communities. And when we sat down to talk about it, the things that came up were that we needed to make teachers. To be able to make it sustainable, we needed to make teachers. That was like number one priority. And also to educate our own communities about Salish weaving, because it had been out of the community for a while. And our elders, even the elders of the day, didn't really hold a lot of knowledge about the weaving. So we did a lot of work with people who did carry that knowledge, and I'm so grateful to my grandmother, who was still here at that time, and I think she was 94, and she had knowledge from her grandmother. And then also, there were so many things that happened here. Also, I was looking at films in the archives and ran across a film from 1928, Harlan Smith, and it just so I had known that there was a film of some kind out there, and it had our ancestors on there. And it just so happened that it was my husband's great-grandmother was wool weaving on the video, and spinning wool, with a spindle wheel, which really not too many people do, and weaving as well. And my great-grandfather was on there fishing and building looms and things. So it was an amazing amazing discovery to see that, and it was quite emotional. I remember Jameson was there when I first looked at that film. Yeah, that was so amazing. And working with Dr. Leslie Tepper, and who was very supportive of entrenching the weaving knowledge in the communities, we were able to write a book on Salish weaving, and we traveled to Europe. We went to Scotland and traveled all over Europe. Traveled to Smithsonian, Boston, many different museums that held weavings, and were able to study those weavings. And I think one of the other main things about that was, so we could take beautiful photographs that could go in the book, that a lot of weavers might not travel to see these weavings. And so we wanted to make sure that there was beautiful color photographs in there, so weavers could study the photographs and be able to do the designs and look at the colors that were used. And although we can't really speak to those weavers that were weaving at that time and wove those pieces that were 200 years old or so, and because the women's work wasn't really that documented, or it's not that documented. There's beautiful baskets and beautiful weaving techniques in this world that, everybody has a weaving history, but nobody knows who the weavers were. I think that's really, really interesting, and I think, I'm sure that will change. Because as I was talking about weaving, it's so important in all cultures. In the Coast Salish culture, when we do ceremonies, the first thing you see is a weaving being put on the floor for a person to stand on. It creates a pure, sacred space to stand on that, and it represents a new start. When you get a name, or you get married, or you get a chieftainship, or you're memorializing a person, they're put on a blanket that was made just for that ceremony, and the person is given a robe to wear, and that was made just for them for that ceremony, and they're given a headband is put on, a woven headband, and they all have meaning, and they all have a job to do, those weavings. And the weavers, when we teach, we always tell them, the weaver's job in the community is so important, because you're weaving protection for our people. And that's what you're doing. You're praying, and you're putting your good energy into there for protection for the people who are going to wear these weavings. So, and having the experience I had here, I was able to go out and continue talking to nation members and elders about, and know the questions to ask, and how do we record this, and what's important to record, and what's going to be meaningful in the future, for the future of our people, what goes in our archives, what we don't have in archives. There's one thing, we now have a cultural center, but we really can't store a lot of things in there. But so the experience here, I was able to help, like I said, help work on the cultural center, help design it, and then also was really privileged also to be an artist who led an apprenticeship program and filled up the cultural center, and co-curated the story for our people. So a lot of that experience I got here, and it gave me the confidence to work for my people. You need a lot of confidence to work for your own people, because what you're doing is it lives on in your community, and you're answering to your community. So you have to go in there with a lot of confidence and stand on the stories that you tell. So I always have to make sure and acknowledge the ancestors who gave us all of this that we talk about today, and created all those techniques. And when I warp up a loom, I just think, how did they do this? How did they just say, I'm gonna warp it up a certain way so I can weave twice the length of the loom, or all these amazing things that they did, peel the bark off a tree to make a basket. How do you make all these things? I just think it's so amazing. We have a great story to tell. Another thing that, while here, found out that we had some ancestors here. We had 2 ancestors here, and we were able to start the repatriation process. I phoned home and let our chief and council know, and they said, well, start the process now, do what you have to do, and was guided a lot through that process here, and was able to bring our ancestors home. Our ancestors were taken from the Stanley Park area. I don't know if you know Vancouver, but the Stanley Park area, it's in the middle of the city. And after being guided through taking them from here, we brought them for a ride on the way home from the airport. We were escorted by the RCMP and had a procession, and we brought them through Stanley Park. And it was a beautiful day like this. It was a beautiful day when we brought them, and then we had, I asked the elders, what kind of ceremonies would you like to do for this? And they said, we're gonna do everything for those ancestors. We're gonna do everything that we have. We did Catholic, we did Shaker, we did our secret society mask ceremony. We did every kind of ceremony that we had for those ancestors. They were over 4,000 years old. And they were high people because their head was shaped, what they used to do for high-ranking people in our nation. and it was a beautiful day, and I was so grateful my grandmother was still here to be able to walk up and see those ancestors. I walked up there. She said, I want to go see those ancestors now. And she grabbed my arm and we walked up there. She was really tiny. And I was standing there with her holding my arm and looking at those over 4,000-year-old ancestors. And it was just an amazing feeling that I'll never, ever forget. It still chokes me up. Yeah, I just felt smaller than a speck of sand. I just, where we are on the timeline, we have such a little time to contribute what we can. And so we had the prayers for them the night before. We brought them to our upper territory and for our people up there, and had prayers there. And then we had the sacred ceremony. The morning that we were having the sacred ceremony, there was a huge snowstorm. So it was in our upper territory. Whoever was up there, stayed up there the night before, was able to be there. But if somebody didn't go up the night before, they weren't able to get through. Some of my sisters couldn't get through and were so upset that they couldn't come when we reinterred those ancestors. So it was a huge snow. And then we were able to have our ceremonies for them. And then a little while later, I don't know if the news might have got here, but there was a huge windstorm, and it knocked down a lot of trees in Stanley Park. Stanley Park was like the most affected, and it was the Global News did a aerial shot in their planes, and they showed where the most damage was, and it was where those ancestors were taken from. It was just so amazing, the signs of heading in the right direction. And I never ever thought of it as destructive, or I looked at it as renewal for our people to claim where we're from. That was our largest village in Stanley Park, and it was claimed for Stanley Park. So that was our largest village. But a lot of these, it was an amazing thing. It was like if it was in a movie, I would just be wowed, but it really happened in real life. So, all of that, started here. So I'm really grateful that, I was able to gain those skills here and have the confidence to follow through, talk to our elders, talk to our leadership, and talk to our youth, and the rest of everybody in between, which is probably my age. So really grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you to all three of our guest panelists. As I mentioned earlier, we are having a reunion today of a number of past interns. I think there's close to 20 former interns that are here in the building today, and the number seems to be growing. So that's kind of nice. Every time I look around, I see somebody else. Part of what we wanted to do with the panel today was to have the former interns share a bit of their stories and some of their experiences as cultural ambassadors. We also had a couple of questions remaining. We'll probably dedicate maybe 5 minutes to each question and leave it open to the floor if anybody wants to come up and make comments about their suggestions or their questions. There's microphones. I think there's a microphone on this side. Up to the right, and there's a handheld microphone. So if people have questions, feel free to ask. Right now we wanted to move on to the theme of what are the biggest priorities and challenges in preserving Indigenous cultures presently. So I'm going to quickly ask the panelists to answer, and then anybody who wants to come up with a question can do so. So just feel free to.
Priorities and challenges. I think one of the challenges is while I was interviewing elders throughout the years, I started getting nervous about doing that job because I would interview a lot of elders, and then it seems like they would pass away not too long after that. And I started getting nervous about it, and I just thought, I was wondering if they were gonna like not want to see me coming or something. But at the same time, it just shows how important it is for our people to know our history and record that history for the youth. I heard this quote while I was in Santa Fe. This elder was saying that we need to make, our responsibility is to make our youth not even know that there was an interruption in our culture. That's our job. That's our job today. And I think we all can work on a little part of that. And I work on my part of it, and I work hard at it. And I mean, when we were teaching for the Olympics and apprenticing, it was, literally 24/7. We built a studio, all of that to keep things going. So now, presently, I'm doing some advisory for the Bill Reid Gallery, and for my own nation, I just I'm sitting on the Cultural and Education Committee, and sort of getting to steer how we think things should happen, and how we. I think the other thing that's important is to identify ourselves on our land. We need to identify ourselves on our land more than we do. Be more assertive, and I think that's all part of making our youth experience that the no interruption in our culture. Just keep that going for them. I think they need to know all of that. Otherwise, they don't have the whole story. What our places were called in the language, because they mean something. Just the name of a place can tell you what happened there in the language. So I think those are some of the challenges.
I myself find big challenges as well, being involved in the museum field here for 20 plus years, is the importance of our sacred objects to return to the communities, to the people, to the nations of the community. We need to create that dialogue and then proceed down that path, because those objects that our people find sacred, that are in museum collections, need to return to our communities. We need to handle that. Our young people need to handle that. Understand, give those good words, practice that culture with those objects, as well as many remains, our human remains, they need to go back into the ground. There's been enough years of studying our ancestors who've been uncovered. That's a big priority for our people. And we need to create and educate these individuals who can facilitate that type of dialogue at the federal level, at the provincial level, at the community level, so that we can keep that open dialogue to go back and forth. As well, we need to create teams. From my own personal experience, in my program, graduated here in 1998. 2 of us from Akwesasne were participants here. Sabrina Jacobs is the other, and she's out there hiding somewhere. She's here today. But anyhow, I think that we need to create teams. We need to create more than one person has to go through the program and specialize. We need someone who can do conservation. But everybody should know a little bit about it, but we need one person to specialize. We need one person to do collections management, but we need everybody else on the team to understand how it works. So we can implement these teams into the communities, into the nations, so that they can create their own organization, they can create their own facilities to house. We're really good on building the capacity. We're there. We're gaining momentum. But now what we have to do is retain that capacity within our communities so that we have a strong staff of people who can manage cultural resources. And then we can be the caretakers, the stewards of those objects. We can create living collections, perhaps to replace objects that are repatriated with historical ethnographic material with contemporary ethnographic material, or replications. A lot of people I was exposed to with my learning about the museum practices, and especially museum preventative conservation, is that there are quite a few people out there who do replications. And I myself got a little turned on by some of these reenactors who go by the thread, historically accurate thread and beads of a period costume. And they won't use any contemporary needles. They'll use the needles of the time. Understand the trade beads, the cloth that was used in trading cloth, even items that were used prehistoric to European contact. Those are all important teaching tools for our young people to understand how far we've came and how far we're going to go into the future. Thank you.
So this is something that was mentioned in our earlier session today. And I think one of the challenges is having Indigenous voices and perspectives incorporated, and not just incorporated, but respected in telling our stories and in discussions about our material heritage. I had one experience in the past where a colleague and myself, we were asked to give our perspectives about an archaeological collection that was going on display in a museum. We were asked to talk about what these items meant to us, and our perspectives were to be videotaped and to be in the gallery with the collection. And what happened after we did the taping of what we had to say, the video came back to us with the edits, and we found that everything that we had to say, it was cut up and edited into basically just to support the archaeological perspective of the collection. So it was completely taken out of context, and this was so discouraging. Yeah, it was a pretty terrible experience. So yeah, hopefully I don't have to have an experience like this again. And I just, we ended up speaking up and about what happened, and the video was re-edited to be in line with what the messages that we were trying to convey. So that was good that we ended up being listened to in the end, but it was just, yeah, really discouraging for that to happen.
I think that's a really good point that I, as an intern myself who graduated from the program, that was one of the biggest things that I took from the program, was actually being able to speak up for myself and taking on the professional self-confidence that's required of a person, because once you get in a position, you're expected to have that responsibility and be the spokesperson for it. And sometimes you're just feeling like you're not ready. And walking through the program gave me a little bit of that kind of self-confidence. So I think that's a really good, important point. We only have a few minutes left, so we're going to bypass the last question. But I did want to give people, anyone in the audience, an opportunity to, if they have any questions or if there's any questions coming in. So I think we've got about 2-3 minutes left now. So if anybody has a question. Oh, we have former intern Barry Pottle to ask a question.
Round of applause, please.
Is this on? I'm just wondering, with respect to the program in the next 25 years, what are the plans and priorities and the challenges from a museum perspective, and how do you foresee having more interns come into the program if there is a possibility of increasing the numbers of interns?
What a wonderful, wonderful question. That's exactly what we're trying to find out with our interns. We took this opportunity to have an alumni day, but we wanted to make it a productive day that would help us provide leadership into the future. So people are here gathered today to reflect, to celebrate with one another, but also to lay down some ideas and some plans about priorities and challenges. So we have our former alumni busy answering questions on video, in written form, making comments, we're taking notes, and these will help us decide what some of the program direction is going to be in the future. So we are looking forward to this right now. So we're living in the here and now, and we're making plans for what's going to happen next. So thank you very much for that question. I think on that note, if there are no more questions, we are about out of time. I'm just going to check with our technician. Looks like we have a question coming in.
So we do have a question online. This is from Miss Valerie. She says that yesterday we went to the museum and participated in a school program called Tradition of the Anishinaabe. Do participants in the program have input in the development of school programs delivered by the museum?
Yes, they do. In a nutshell, yes, they do. We've had a couple of interns who, actually 3 of our interns were very interested in public programming this year, and have done some work with the teams who are redeveloping programs for existing exhibitions, and then helping with input for planning on the exhibitions that are coming up. So yes, I think one thing I'd like to emphasize before we end is that all of the placements that the interns get aren't just training placements. These are real life placements that their work is going to be shared, and it's developed alongside the professionals and technicians, so it's actual real work in real time. So we do have that kind of input as well. Thank you. Thank you, Valerie. With that, I think we're going to draw it to a close. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I think it was a productive session, and I'm really, really happy to be up here alongside 3 people that I really respect in their work. They were leaders before they came to the program, and I think they've taken on a huge responsibility, as have all of the other interns who are in the room with us today, and those who may be joining us online. It's an important program that I feel really, really privileged to be a part of. So thank you very much for joining us here today. Nyango.